All right, Garrett Blevins here. This is part 3 of the series that I'm putting up. This is about macro cycle planning. We talked about the micro cycle in the last video. We did it on a 12-week cycle, which would have the first 3 weeks, according to the Prill-Pinch chart, on protocol 1, 3 weeks on number 2, 3 weeks on number 3, 2 weeks on number 2, sorry, if I could count, number 4, and then your last week, which brings you to week 12, is your test week. Now, maybe you have different goals, and as you become more advanced in lifting, you're not going to be able to increase your squat, bench, and deadlift every cycle. In fact, you might only be able to maintain 2 of the lifts and focus your extra effort into that 3rd lift. The reason why is volume. Volume is the danger of powerlifters, in my opinion. The reason it's a danger, it's also your friend, the reason it's a danger is because once you need a certain amount of volume to gain strength in a particular lift, you are always going to have to achieve that training volume and stimulus to grow from that point on. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say you begin lifting. You're a year 1 lifter. And every training cycle, when you go through your micro cycle, you make gains on all 3 lifts. And let's say you're moving, just for the sake of numbers, these aren't supposed to be accurate, I have no idea. Let's say you move 50,000 pounds on your squat. That's your total work volume. You get work volume. Volume is equal to weight, the weight you lift, times the number of sets, times the number of reps. That is what gives you volume for training. So if you do 100 for 3 sets of 10, 10 times 3 is 30, 30 times 100, 3,000. That's your training volume for the day. So let's say over the entire 12 weeks, you do 50,000 pounds of total volume in your squat. You do 25,000 on your bench. And you do 65,000 on your deadlift. So, for a total of, let's see if I can add it up, 140,000? I don't know. People out there with calculators, tell me if I'm right in the comments. 140,000 pounds of total volume for the 12-week cycle. And let's say that all of your lifts increase, squat goes up 20 pounds, bench goes up 10 pounds, deadlift goes up 30 pounds. Hooray, cannons go off, fireworks in the sky, you've achieved a better total. So, now you do the same cycle again. You have a new 1 rep max from which you are getting your training percentages, and that means that because you increased your weight that you're getting your percentages off of, you can do the exact same program, and all of these volumes are going to go up. It's not going to go up drastically, but it might go up to, like 52,000, 27,000, 68,000. And that might still be enough to drive gains. Eventually, you're not going to be able to recover from your workouts because the percentages are going to start to get too difficult for you. There are some people that can handle it and can recover. Ed Cohn was able to do linear periodization, which is what we're talking about. Linear periodization, you start with low percentages for high reps. You increase the weight and you decrease the volume over the training cycle from week 1 to 12. You increase the weight, you decrease the volume. Again, that is also why your optimal rep ranges go down as you go through the weeks. As the weight increases, optimal rep range and volume goes down. Some people can do that forever. For me, it didn't work. I had to find ways around it. There are ways around it. That's why all sorts of different programs exist other than linear periodization. So, when you have these kinds of gains, once you find some sort of program, whatever the protocol is, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 10 weeks, 16 weeks, doesn't matter. If it works for you, plug your new maxes for your lifts back in I'll show you how to make an Excel sheet where you can just plug in your new maxes and do everything exactly the same way you did before and recreate those results for as long as you can. Ride out the gains you can get on linear periodization. That's going to be good for you as a beginner and maybe even into intermediate lifting. But there's going to come a point where you just don't have enough time in the day. Life gets real. You've got kids, you've got a job, you've got family, and you just can't spend 1,000,000 hours in the gym. Likewise, your body can't handle 3 or 4 hour workouts every week. So you cannot achieve this sort of training volume forever. So you're going to have to pick. You're going to have to say, okay, I know that if I plug in my new max to squats, let's say this is way down the road when you're doing a whole lot more, but we're going to keep the numbers the same for sake of clarity. Let's say you're lifting this volume. You say to yourself, well, I know I can't increase my squat sets and reps because I can't recover from it if I'm also increasing my deadlift sets and reps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this volume static on deadlifts. My deadlifts are really good right now, but my squat's lagging behind. So I'm going to keep my deadlift program the same as it was before. Maybe I'll up the weights a little bit, but maybe I'll cut some of the sets out. So I'll still be lifting heavier weights than I did last cycle, but I won't do as many reps. And that's where you can adjust with Prill-Pin's chart. Maybe for deadlifts, every other thing you're doing, a 3x8, but you do a 3x7 for deadlifts. And you use the heavier weights according to your new max, but you lower the total amount of reps of deadlift per cycle to keep the volume relatively static. Your deadlift is probably not going to increase, so your deadlift stays the same. But because you can lift more weight in squats and you're more recovered because you're not doing as much deadlift, you're able to up your squatting not just to 52,000, but to 60,000 pounds of total squatting, and your squat, which maybe got stalled out last cycle, is now going to be driven into gains. And so now you make, finally after being stuck at some squat max for a long time, you make a 40-pound PR, and you're really excited. You've added extra volume in, and that's pushed you through the plateau that you were at. Eventually, you're going to have to start moving pieces around in your training so that you can add more volume in somewhere and try to maintain without losing any strength in the other lifts. It can almost get like a juggling act sometimes, and it can get a little difficult and also discouraging. When you have a bad cycle is when you've messed up your programming. You've either cut too much volume out of one of your lifts, or you've added volume in and it still wasn't enough to drive gains. This can get discouraging, and if you're in powerlifting for any amount of time, you're going to hit plateaus. It will be discouraging. Get over it and keep going back in, keep doing your best, and you're going to make gains. The older and the stronger you get, the slower and the harder the gains become. That's just going to be a general truth. But anyways, enough about gains and whether you may or may not have them. Let's talk about microcycles, because that's going to be important when you do get to the point where you can't just rerun the same protocol every time. So let's say that you've stalled out. You've been running a 12-week cycle where you're using the protocols in a fairly even format from Prill-Pin's chart, and you're stuck. Something you might like to do would be to think of this instead of a 12-week single cycle, think of it as a macro 36-week cycle of 3 12-week blocks. The reason it's good to think in 3 12-week blocks is you're not so concerned about this test or even the test here, but the test here. This one becomes the important one. Maybe that's when you have a big national competition. Maybe that's when you're going to Worlds. Maybe that's just when you're going to your first meet because you haven't gone and you're having a lot of trouble even as a beginner. That happens sometimes, even for people that are younger and are just starting the sport. Sometimes it's difficult. If you love it, you'll stay with it. If you hate it, you can go do something else. So if you're thinking in 3 12-week cycles for a 36-week macro cycle, see, now we're getting into, whole years. You can have 2 36-week cycles butted up against each other. And you're talking about a multi-year plan at that point. So, on this, maybe you're going to do, instead of an even distribution, maybe you're going to do 5 weeks at protocol 1 and really front load your program with a lot of speed work and a lot of hypertrophy work. Bunch of 3 sets of 10, keeping things, maybe even go above this rep range. Maybe do some bodybuilding style workouts for the first 2 weeks and try to actually put some mass on. Maybe you've tapped your potential for what you can lift with the amount of muscle you have. And so you need to put on some new muscle. Maybe you take a break and you do a whole 12-week, 16-week cycle of hypertrophy work. And you go out and you do bodybuilding style. You could find information on that. So let's say you do 5 weeks at protocol 1, 4 weeks at protocol 2. That puts you at 9 weeks. 2 weeks at protocol 3, 1 week at protocol 4. As you can see, you've spent the majority of your time in your first cycle in these 2 rep ranges. And again, look at the volume that you're going to be focusing on when you're looking at those 2. That's going to be a lot of volume, and that's going to be something that's going to help you grow. And you're going to test. This test might not be so great because you've spent so much time building a base, but not honing it and honing the skill of the single rep. So let's talk about the next cycle. We're going to do this as protocol 1, protocol 2, protocol 3, protocol 4, just as we're talking about over here. Let's say we go back and we spend 3 weeks here, 3 weeks here, 3 weeks here, 2 weeks here. As you can see, pretty even split. I'm pretty sure that's what we had to start with. And that's a pretty balanced program. This is going to be your bread and butter, especially as a beginning lifter. You're probably not going to need to throw one of these in there. You're probably going to be able to do something like this and just mess around with exactly what you do for these 3 weeks at protocol 2. You're just going to mess around with what type of protocol. You've got a huge rep range to work with, so work with it. Do different stuff. It doesn't have to be the same stuff every time. Again, it's just guidelines. And then let's talk about what you do on your last of the 3 microcycles that make up the macro cycle. 1 week at 1, maybe 1 or 2. Let's go 2 weeks at 2, 4 weeks at 3, 6, 7, and 4 weeks at 4. Maybe that's a little overloaded. It might be. Maybe you want to do something like that. But as you can see, you're spending the majority of your time at that point in lower rep ranges. Additionally, even on protocol 2, you could focus more on the 80%, and you could stay closer to the 12 rep than the 24 rep protocols. For your first cycle, you're going to want to stay on the higher side of the range. For your mid-cycle, shoot for optimal. And for your last cycle, keep it on the lower side. Even when you're doing 1 week at style 1, do it for 18 reps. When you're doing protocol 2 for 3 weeks, keep it by the 12 reps. Keep it by 10. Keep it, mid-range. By the end of this time testing, you should have started from a building form of lifting where you're building muscle to a strength-focused cycle because you're doing, again, bread and butter, right down the middle, optimal rep ranges, building strength to where you are now, maximizing your ability to recruit your muscle strength that you build. You built the muscle, you built the strength, and now you have maximized your ability through heavy work to utilize all of your muscle fiber into a single movement. This is going to be something that, more, intermediate to advanced lifters are going to have to utilize programs like this. On these test days, you might not see a lot of improvement. You might not see any. But you might notice your body changing. Or maybe you notice very small gains. But this is what you care about. And you know what? If it takes you 36 weeks to make progress, but you're an elite lifter and you're making progress after that 36 weeks, that's an accomplishment. It's not the same as when you started and you could just do the same thing over and over again and plug in your new rep maxes at the end after every test and just keep rerunning the same cycle. So that's what when you think about microcycle or macrocycle planning, you're looking at how you utilize different elements within your microcycles to accomplish that. Additionally, something I should say, when you become an advanced lifter, you might have to focus, like I said, you can't raise your absolute max. Let's say your squat from 700 to 725 or whatever. You can't raise your absolute max on squats because you're trying to work on your bench. And as I had the volume up here before, you just can't add the volume in to increase everything at the same time. That doesn't mean, though, that you couldn't work on a goal like, I want to increase my squat mobility and my depth on squats so that I don't get red lighted for depth. Maybe you're not going to get any stronger at squat, but you could get more flexible while you're throwing all the extra volume into your bench press. Maybe the bench is what you're trying to up overall, but that doesn't mean that you can't work on your deadlift form or your beltless squat strength or your depth for squats or any number of other objectives. So sometimes as a lifter, you have to think, in this microcycle, what are my goals? Have at least one goal for each lift. As a beginning lifter, what are your goals for the cycle? Increase your squat, increase your bench, increase your deadlift. But as an advanced lifter, what are your goals? For example, currently, right now my deadlift has been going up a whole lot. It's been going really well every cycle. So I decided I'm not going to up my volume at all. I'm just going to try to recreate everything that I've done exactly the same way in the last cycle. In the last cycle, I dropped deficit pulls as my third movement, and I'll talk if you want to know more about how many movements and what I mean when I say 3 movements. For deadlift, I deadlift from the floor, from blocks, and 2 cycles ago I was doing deficit deadlifts. Last cycle I did from the floor, from blocks, and conventional pulls, and I had good progress with that. So I'm going to do conventional pulls again as that third exercise. So I'm trying to just do everything the same with deadlift. Bench press is what I've decided I want to focus on increasing. So what have I done to do that? I've added an additional day of working out where I'm now doing 4 types or 4 variations of a pressing movement a week. I've upped that volume a lot because I'm trying to force my bench to grow. That's the lift I'm really focused on. And for squat, I'm not trying to make my squat any stronger than it is right now. I'm trying to make it deeper. And I'm going to have to get stronger to do that, but I'm also going to have to get more mobile to do that. So my 3 objectives are squat depth, overall strength in the bench, and just letting the deadlift do whatever the deadlift does, trying to make sure that I'm consistent with it. And I'm actually, one of the things I'm focusing on right now is making sure I don't have a soft lockout, but that I really pull all the way through. And so those are form things that I'm focusing on, whereas the bench is the only one I'm trying to really drive up. And that's how I've worked the microcycle to produce those results. I haven't gotten to the point where I really have to do a plan this long. I hope that I get there someday. For me, that lets you know that you've become an advanced lifter when just doing the same cycle over and over again doesn't work. So anyways, hope that helps with understanding macrocycle planning.